Welcome to Key Talking Points.
The podcast that makes learning effortless.
No fluff, no jargon, just clear, engaging explanations.
We break down complex topics so you don't have to.
Let's get straight to the point.
Visit keytalkingpoints.com for more.
All right, let's dive straight in. Kin selection. It sounds technical, but it's actually a fascinating concept in evolutionary biology. The idea is simple. Natural selection not only favours traits that help you, but also traits that help your relatives reproduce, even if it costs you. Weird, isn't it?
Right. And this is often tied to something called altruism. Behaviours that seem selfless on the surface, but have this underlying evolutionary logic. Imagine an ant sacrificing itself to protect its colony. It's not helping itself, but by saving the queen, it's ensuring its family genes carry on.
Exactly. Charles Darwin, the big guy behind evolution, even puzzled over this in his book, On the Origin of Species. He looked at sterile worker bees and wondered, why would an animal that can't even reproduce evolve to exist? His answer, it must benefit the bee's relatives, the same stock as he called it, and that makes it worthwhile.
But the real breakthrough came nearly a century later, right? W.D. Hamilton in 1964 actually put math to it. He wrote out Hamilton's rule, RB is greater than C. Basically, if the genetic relatedness, that's the R, multiplied by the benefit to the relative, the B, is greater than the cost to the individual, the C.
Boom. Altruism starts to make sense from an evolutionary point of view.
Let's slow that down. You're helping someone who's closely related to you. If what you do boosts their survival or reproduction enough, it kind of offsets the hit you take. Like, you might lose out today, but the family gene pool wins in the big picture.
Oh, I love this example. J.B.S. Haldane, a famous geneticist, once quipped that he'd lay down his life for 2 brothers, or 8 cousins. Why? Because 2 brothers share about 50% of your DNA, and 8 cousins, 12.5% each adds up to the same. It's math meets morality, isn't it?
It is. And what's cool is how this principle applies across species. Think of vervet monkeys or social shrimp. Altruism's everywhere we look in nature. But all of it, like Hamilton showed, comes back to those numbers. 2 genetic payoffs.
And remember, kin selection is about genes. It's not about animals consciously weighing up, oh, should I jump in to help? Nature's just built these instincts, these behaviours, into them over generations.
Right. And when you break it down, it's this dance between cost, benefit, and relatedness. It's one of those concepts where, once you get it, you see it everywhere. In ants, bees, even humans, helping relatives more than strangers. Makes you think, doesn't it?
So now that we've unpacked the math and logic behind kin selection, let's talk about how it actually plays out. Picture yourself in the wild. How do animals figure out who's kin and who's not? It's fascinating.
Good question. And the answer is fascinating. There are these 2 main mechanisms that scientists talk about. One is kin recognition. Being able to tell who's related to you and who isn't. The second one's a bit simpler. Proximity. In viscous populations, where organisms don't move far from where they're born, you end up living around family by default.
Right, so even if they can't, recognise their cousin, they're still more likely to help just because everyone nearby shares their genes. Nature's cheat sheet.
Exactly. And this plays out in really fascinating ways. Take vervet monkeys, for example. The younger ones, you'll love this, get babysat by their older sisters or even their grandmothers.
Oh, I've read about this. It's called allomothering, isn't it?
Yep, that's the term. It's a perfect way to ensure the genes of the whole group are passed on. Older siblings and relatives take care of the young, giving the actual mothers a chance to catch their breath and maybe even have more offspring. It's a win-win for the family's gene pool.
And let's not forget about social shrimp. Have you heard of the Synalpheus regalis species? These little guys, gals mostly, live in colonies where they defend their younger relatives, even at their own expense.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. They form these tight-knit groups where the defenders are like full-time bodyguards. They don't reproduce themselves but spend their lives making sure the young ones survive and carry on the colony's genes. It's kin altruism in action.
Okay, so that's what's happening in the animal world. But what about us humans? We do this kind of thing all the time, don't we?
Oh, definitely. Think about how families operate. We're much more likely to help our siblings or even cousins than some random stranger. Take something like gift giving. People usually spend more on gifts for close family members. And let's not even get started on inheritance laws. It's all kin selection at work, isn't it?
And what's so great is that it doesn't have to be flashy life or death sacrifices like you see with ants or monkeys. It's in the practical stuff, helping your nephew pay for college or leaving your grandkids something in your will. Small acts, big evolutionary impact.
And that's the beauty of kin selection. It's woven into the quiet, everyday parts of life. But it's always there, subtly shaping behaviours and relationships. And this balance between helping others and helping yourself, it's key.
So we've seen how diverse and fascinating kin selection can be in both animals and humans. But with something so integral to behaviour, why does it spark so much debate?
Yes, it's such a cornerstone in evolutionary biology. But not everybody buys into it, do they? A lot of discussions boil down to one big comparison: kin selection versus group selection.
Exactly. And here's the big divide. Kin selection focuses on helping related individuals because of shared genes, right? While group selection, on the other hand, is about traits that benefit an entire group, regardless of individual genetic ties. It's like choosing between family loyalty and team spirit.
That's a good way of putting it. The thing about group selection, though, is it's, well, let's say controversial. Many scientists argue it's not really separate from kin selection, just a fancy way to reframe it. You see, even group-focused behaviours still boil down to Hamilton's rule at the genetic level.
Right, but then you've got people like E.O. Wilson. He stirred the pot by saying inclusive fitness theory, tied to kin selection, doesn't really hold up. He pushed group selection instead, especially when it comes to social insects.
Yeah, and that made waves. Wilson said we should think of behaviours in terms of multi-level selection, stuff happening both at the group level and the individual level. A lot of researchers fired back, though, defending Hamilton's rule and publishing, like 100 rebuttals in Nature.
Oh, they went all out. But honestly, it's good, isn't it? Evolutionary biology thrives on debates like these. They push the science forward.
True. And for all the critiques, Hamilton's rule has still held its ground pretty well. There's empirical evidence everywhere. A classic example's that red squirrel study in Canada, where mother squirrels actually adopted little orphaned relatives if the benefits outweighed the costs. Textbook, kin selection.
And we see similar ideas in humans too, don't we? I mean, we've already talked about how kin selection explains helping behaviours within families. But look at wills and inheritances. People almost always leave the bulk of their estate to their closest relatives. Evolutionary logic, plain and simple.
Absolutely. And while some argue kin selection doesn't explain everything, it's clear it's a huge part of what drives altruistic behaviours, both in nature and in society. It's one of those frameworks that just makes the world click into place a bit better.
So whether you lean toward group selection, kin selection, or something in between, the point is these debates won't stop anytime soon. And that's what makes this field alive, you know? Always questioning, always learning.
Couldn't agree more. And with that, I think we've covered a lot today. From altruistic ants to gift-giving humans and even those family squabbles in science. We've truly run the gamut, haven't we?
We have. And listeners, thanks for sticking with us. Kin selection, it's a lot to unpack, but isn't it worth it? Until next time, take care and keep asking questions.
Cheers, everyone.